Welcome to the first foundation lecture for the 2025 fall semester. We are so glad you're here. Before we begin, let me remind you that there will not be a lecture next week, but we will be back on October 20th with our next event, the Malpas Brothers. Tonight, we are gathered to celebrate one of our own, Dean Tuck. Dean is from Bailey, North Carolina, where he lives with his wife, Deniz, and 2 daughters. He attended ECU, where he studied English with a concentration in creative writing. He taught writing at ECU for 4 years before coming to Wayne Community College, where he has taught since 2012, and we are so lucky to have him. Dean's writing career focused on short fiction for many years, in which time his stories were published in literary journals such as Epoch, the Florida Review, and the Bellwatt Fiction Journal. In the 20-teens, he shifted his efforts toward completing a novel, for which he will be reading tonight. Our colleague, Rebecca Harden-Thrift, describes it as a book that feels like it materialized from the land itself, both mesmerizing and inevitable. His novel, Twinless Twin, won the Association of Writers and Writing Program's Novel Prize last year and has been published by the University of Nebraska Press. In recent years, he's largely been writing poetry, and his work recently won Tar River Poetry's Ekphrastic Poem Contest, which was held in association with the North Carolina Museum of Art. And if you want to see it, it is actually on display out on the table where Dean will be signing books after the show. In recent years, he's largely been, he hopes one day to publish a short fiction collection as well as a poetry collection, and says, after that, I'll be done. We hope he isn't. Please join me in welcoming our colleague, teacher, and award-winning author, Dean Tuck.
Alrighty, thank you, Allison, and thank you everybody here. Thank you for attending tonight to hear me read from and talk about my novel. And thanks to the foundation of Wayne Community College for allowing me to do so, and for the English department's hand in all of this. Before I read, I'd like to give you a brief understanding of the book, a kind of an elevator pitch. Twinless Twin is about many things, but the novel largely focuses on the family of a troubled, enigmatic boy who the family wishes desperately to protect and to understand. In chapter 1, Martha, the boy's mother, mentions that he is at the center of some unspeakable tragedy that has had dire consequences for the family. As a result, Martha finds herself constantly ruminating over her life, wondering how things could have been prevented, or wondering what might have turned her son into the pariah he's become. I'd like to read just a few words from the opening of the book so you can get a feel for her character and the voice. So this is just a little bit of chapter 1. Maybe it was because he always played alone by the railroad tracks. He must have picked up every loose railroad spike between here and Saluda County. I didn't think much of it until one day I noticed there were enough around the house to fill a 5-gallon bucket. We couldn't afford many toys, so whatever he found was fair game, and with these spikes he had discovered his building blocks. He lined them up side by side like cross ties on the floor, heads of the spikes alternating so they fit perfectly until he laid out his own railroad track indoors. At first he preferred circle and oval designs. Later he'd lay these winding paths, beautiful curving shapes. He made sure they always met back at the start. He'd walk barefooted along his track, around and around, always quiet and with such concentration, walk himself into a kind of trance. You look in his eyes and never know where he was at. I imagine it was his way of bringing the railroad feeling home. I didn't care much for all the rusted metal dirtying up the house, but since we had so little, I let him do as he pleased. Maybe if our carpet had been a little newer, I might have objected, but something about the calm it put on him, I couldn't take that from him. At first, I wouldn't let him play out there, too dangerous, and you never know who or what you'll find. But his sister was too young to play. He rarely had a school friend, and that's all he wanted to do, walk up and down the rails all day, searching for things to fill his pockets. So that's a little bit from the mother of the Twinless Twin. Chapter 1 continues in this fashion, Martha offering up a lot of maybes. Maybe if I'd done this or that differently, or if this or that wouldn't have happened. I think of this chapter as Martha's index of maybes, of what ifs, and the unspoken tragedy that her son is related to has somewhat locked her in this looking backwards mode of life. On the other hand, her husband, Ray, the boy's father, has completely abandoned the family. A few things happened to Ray in chapter 1, some incidents with his son, and later almost losing his life in a workplace accident. And he sees in these things omens of a life to come that he feels too weak, too unprepared to face. I'm going to be reading a portion of chapter 3 tonight, which focuses on Ray, in which we find glimpses of Ray constantly in motion, more or less fleeing his responsibility, his family, but also aimlessly in pursuit of a new life that he can't comprehend. So this is a portion of chapter 3, and it's called Before Crossing the Desert. This chapter is kind of written in a fragmented sort of snapshot way where you see brief glimpses, and so I'll pause a little bit between those little pictures. Ray, leaving with nothing but the clothes on his back, walking beneath a late spring wooded canopy. Dirt roads will lead to paved roads to highways. A few rides and he's 100 miles from home. 100's as good as 1,000,000, but no matter where he rests nor the duration of his stay, he knows he will shut his eyes in new rooms and new towns among new people forever, gathering 1,000 lives into this one lifetime. His wife, daughter, and son, merely 3 drops of rain in a red clay puddle, their concentric ripples echoing outward into stillness. Ray's boots stepping over, leaving, gone. Ray listening to a woman in a diner tell how her sister-in-law was visited by pale men in dark suits after seeing the amber orbs of light rising, dancing, then zipping across the sky during those days when so much strangeness surrounded the visits of the flying gray creature with glowing red eyes. Learning how the woman lost her husband and son in the bridge collapse that marked the end of those fantastic happenings. The family car sunken deep into the murky green river bottom. Riding east with an old man who saw gruesome things during the war, who says he has a son who would be Ray's age now, who warns Ray about the dangers of hitchhiking, who trucks only to keep the lights on at home, who worries if he can afford to feed his aging hogs through the winter, who prefers then cigars to talking, leaving a trail of chewed-up stubs littered along the highways. Ray hunching against the passenger door as they crossed the river, glimpsing a great sandhill crane sailing above their truck, then falling asleep. Ray pouring scotch and soda for sweaty men who run business empires all over the country, who laugh like fraternity brothers in the dim room overlooking the 10th fairway. Ray, after nearly everyone is gone, attempting small talk with a man who owns the clubhouse, owns the dining room, owns the course, owns the mountains surrounding the lake that he owns, which his grandfather created by building a series of dams and flooding an old mining town that very few living even remember. The man sipping his drink replying, "I don't care for football." Ray later chewing on a forkful of lobster meat, the first lobster he's ever seen, which a member has sent back to the kitchen for being overcooked. A young server from Poland laughing at his expression and later taking Ray to one of the hundreds of wooded waterfalls, this one named after a boy named Freddie who fell to his death from the top of the watery cliff. The young woman nearly slipping into the pool at the bottom, caught by Ray, his hand on the small of her back, their eyes meeting, her waiting for Ray to decide. Ray fleeing the mountains, heading east. Ray roaming up and down that ancient neighborhood near the waterfront where a sign by an old oak tree says a great war began here, a fort far across the water with an illuminated flag, passing through neighborhoods set in palmettos and live oaks, hazy with moss spilling from their branches, colonial homes and their wraparound porches with white railings, their wrought iron fences around shadowy yards, Ray's thinning rubber soles molding to the mortar and cobblestone with each step down the empty streets. Resting against a building across the street from a gleaming white church with a towering steeple, sipping whiskey from a flask, coming to himself, breathing deeply, almost sleeping, until a sinking feeling possesses him, irrepressible dread. Ray watching a figure wearing something like a monk's habit, an almost brown crimson, the figure moving smoothly along the facade of the church, pausing at the door, turning in Ray's direction, underneath its hood, emptiness where a face should be, a stare, then passing on, turning the corner, gone. Ray refusing to move or to tear his eyes away, an empty stillness burning within him that feels endless and sure as the grave, but then, broken by the sounds of a choir, indistinct, ghostly voices echoing through the streets, their wordless harmony freezing him all over despite the sweltering heat, the notes rising and falling like the water lapping against the monument walls out across the bay. Ray checking the time, midnight, but the voices go on singing, singing still. Ray learning the hard way that jumping trains east of the Mississippi is a bad business, riding the rails too far north, not far enough west, the hammering of fists and clubs, fighting back and losing, tenderized but toughened, sometimes thrown from railway cars, other times thrown into the jails, before yet again finding a freight train to help him put the cuts and bruises, black eyes, and bloody mouths behind him. Ray riding the rails with a grizzled young man who, beneath the beard and grime and the dirty brown hat and tattered corduroy jacket, is really just a boy from a wealthy family running from becoming his father or his uncle's or any occupation he might lapse into at any point on this journey, warehouse lackey, machinist apprentice, assembler, shift captain, foreman. Then what? The boy saying. Another balding, pot-bellied desk sitter with an unhappily ever after wife and 3 spoiled kids and a couple mistresses, and the young man's voice droning with the rhythm of the wheels on the rails. The countryside streaking past like impressionist paintings of wheat fields, pine groves, rolling hills and pastures dotted with barns and black crows. That life ain't for me, the kid saying. They can have all that, just leave me this. The kid pointing to the endless prairie before them, its low-hanging clouds sending nebulous dark shapes passing over the horizon. I'm going to live it, then I'm going to write it, here. The kid reaching into his sock, handing Ray a wad of money. Get you an old car, this life don't suit you. Ray refusing. I've been carrying it for nearly half a year, too scared to let it go. Now I know it's the only thing standing between me and what I'm trying to do out here, who I'm trying to be, the kid saying. Ray taking the money before leaving, telling him, I hope you get where you're going. The kid saying, I'm already there, man. Ray driving through the desert at night, talking to himself, or to God, or to a ghost, or to no one, or to everyone. Sometimes a coyote or a jackrabbit flashing their eyes or crossing the road before him. At the desert's edge, finding a tiny restaurant, a family's residence conjoined with a kitchen and dining room large enough to serve a dozen people in the chance event a caravan ventures off the highway in dire need of gasoline before beginning the empty 100-mile stretch Ray has just traversed. Ray taking a seat, wicker chair, checkered tablecloth, and half-sheet laminated cardstock menus. A teenage boy tying his apron on the way to the table, asking what'll it be, hamburger steak, onions with gravy, rice, and string beans. The kid ringing the service bell at the counter, calling the order into the kitchen, then leaning against the counter, asking Ray where he's from. Ray thinking on this, asking what a kid does for fun living here in the desert. We're out of the desert here, mister. Dad farms oats and hay. I help with that. But what about for fun? Ray asking. I play football. Got a game tonight, actually. We play 8-man, so most of us play both sides except the quarterback. Ray and the kid talking until a woman appears at the order with his window. Did you get him his drink? The woman asking the boy, impatient, not surprised. Dang, Ma, rushing away. I always forget, the kid saying to Ray as he sets a Coke down. Drinks on the house, Ma says. The kid talking to Ray while he eats, telling him how he drives nearly 30 miles to school one way, how they live next to the restaurant but spend most of their time in here, how they hardly serve a couple dozen people a day, how he's saving up for a used car so his mom can have the pickup in the day while he's at school, how his father trucks, farms, and runs combines for other farmers and always comes home well after dark, asking Ray about his family, about his home, where he's going, why. Ray not responding, thinking about lying, feeling bad about this notion, changing the subject. The woman in a floral print dress, slender yet hardy, dark, careful eyebrows with the slightest of wrinkles at her eyes when she smiles, gently reprimanding her son for bothering customers while they dine, yet joining the two of them at the table anyway. Ray hearing them talk, to him, to each other, sipping his Coke, drifting a moment, forgetting to listen to their words, enjoying their voices, the earnest affection for each other and the sounds that they're making, ringing out like poetry. Ray thinking of another family a half continent away, a wife and daughter, a troubled shadow of a boy. The mother telling Ray how a person ends up running a makeshift restaurant built from a home on the edge of a desert, a cloudy haze creeping into the boy's eyes like a coming storm, a note of resignation in her voice as the mother continues, elbows propped up on the table supporting her lovely face, the overcast covering her eyes too, now a fading smile. Ray panicking inside, his heart swelling with words he'd only blubbered alone to the stifling silence of the Badland Butte, a breath. The mother and son waiting for him to speak, another breath, a hard swallow from telling them everything. The mother sensing the tremor inside him, her eyes glazing with tears. A bell ringing above a screen door, two men walking in, seeing the three of them sitting quietly, intently at the table of the otherwise empty restaurant, asking if they're still serving. Ray, realizing for the last half hour he's been pretending to be the third member of this family, pitying himself, cursing himself, praying to forgive or better yet, forget himself. Leaving a note on the back of his bill that says, "It's yours," and a $20 bill underneath the keys to his car. Studying a few family pictures framed on the wall next to the entrance, memorizing their faces, refusing to look at the father's, turning toward the kitchen to glimpse the woman's face one last time, straining to hear her voice, but she is gone. Ray walking away, catching a ride with yet another trucker, speeding through the void, headed to a green glow on the horizon, wondering if years from now they'll think of him, if they'll tell a story about him, and if in the story he'll be an angel, a man, or a ghost. Ray demanding a truck driver pull over and let him out. "What the hell, fella, you crazy shit, don't live out there," the driver pointing to the silvery white landscape. "It's like dropping a man in the middle of an ocean," the driver imploring him. Ray pulling on the door handle anyway before the truck has slowed to its stop. Ray thanking him and slamming the door, crossing the highway, the ditches, and a wire fence to step out into oblivion's fringe, black shimmering shapes vanishing impossibly far into the distance. Ray collecting smooth black stones the size of his fist in the blinding heat, gathering them into a pile, sweat soaking through his shirt and pants, slipping into a heat-induced delirium, stumbling, a memory of a radio preacher playing in his head. "God speaks, but he won't beckon but so many times, and you keep turning away, quenching the spirit. It's a dangerous game, my friend, and it won't be long before God quits knocking on the door of your heart, leaving you with nothing but silence forevermore. Friend, isn't it time you turned from your own selfish ways?" Ray lifting the stones, hearing voices in them now, crying out, placing them in lines and curves next to each other, letters, the names of his family he vows never to speak of. Ray walking back to the highway, leaving them once again, never looking back. Ray haunting the wharf and dive bars and bookstores and Chinatown shops and anywhere else he pleases, being catcalled by angry poets, smoking and swearing behind their expensive coffees. Ray looking down from an observatory at the bridge and the prison island, recalling stories of jumpers and gangsters and men who dig tunnels in concrete walls with palmed silverware, who maybe drown, who maybe escape on crudely fabricated life rafts, who maybe live alone somewhere nobody knows, feeling hungrier and emptier by the minute. Ray grasping the handrail, hoping the next somewhere calling him will feel different somehow. Ray listening to the river rushing through the canyon, the white-capping current growing less visible in the setting sun, finding a piece of ground fit for his lean-to tarp tent, setting up camp far enough from the 20-somethings and their lanterns and campfires and guitars and beer and smoke. Ray warming a can of soup by his tiny fire, being offered a beer by a lanky young man with glasses and heavy facial hair. Ray hesitating, but the kid's earnest smile and congenial manner winning him over. "You got to join us, though, mister," the young man saying, Ray already regretting, but following anyway. The young man leading him to the fire with his friends and strangers alike, demanding someone get Ray a beer and slide down to give him a seat. Ray learning these young people are largely unknown to one another, yet they're sharing everything they have. Two clean-cut brothers with slicked-back hair like the rock and roll stars of another era standing near the fire with acoustic six-strings on matching straps. The brothers' voices melding in familial harmony, one singing higher and the other singing low, taking turns with the melody coming together for the refrain, sung in a distinct way, the notes and the words ringing out in perfect unison. "I roved and I roamed and I traveled from home, and I left Jenny far o'er the sea, with all the old men in town, taking turns, putting down, oh, wayfaring, wandering me, oh, wayfaring, wandering me. If I saw her one day, would she ask me to stay? Could I still be in their family? With all I am, all I lack, would they dare to welcome back? Oh, wayfaring, wandering me. Oh, wayfaring, wandering me. Keep a warm firelight, hug my daughter good night, would you please? Rock my baby to sleep. Tell Jenny not to wait, not to curse, nor to hate. Oh, wayfaring, wandering me. Oh, wayfaring, wandering me." Ray sipping or smoking anything passing his way, laughing, singing, crying, talking, stumbling, crawling, sleeping, waking with a young woman's wavy chestnut hair in his face, smelling of sweet Betsy after rain, her warmth consuming him, the river carving through the canyon, breakfast voices, Ray lying awake with his arm pulling her close, living this way for another hour. Ray learning from a man with more wealth than sense, masonry, welding, architecture, construction, building an eyesore of a castle in the wilderness, to the chagrin of neighbors and county planning and zoning, who all succumb to the almighty dollar and the best team of lawyers south of the Rockies. So declares this wild anti-government capitalist conspiracy theorist dreamer zillionaire, whose tirades sound mostly like hate and rage when Ray meets him, but sounding more like reason and truth after weeks living and working alongside the man. One day, assisting the man welding, applying the finishing touches high upon a steel catwalk archway, 20 feet higher than the highest treetop, Ray, looking out over the wilderness, away from the welding arc, noticing a shimmering in the woods, one tree, then an adjacent tree, then the next, like a systematic wind or an invisible brontosaurus brushing against the trunks and upper branches. Ray stopping the man, pointing, asking, "What's happening? An earthquake?" "They come around every so often," the man says. "Good thing we're up here and not down there with them, buddy." "Them?" Ray asking. "Children of the sons of God and daughters of man," the man saying, with a laugh more like a cough. The man squinting down at the trees, flipping his visor back on, back to his job. Ray thinking, "I'm done with the woods forever, and maybe I ain't ever coming down from this scaffolding." Ray's ride pulling into a desolate rest stop one night to fill up before crossing the desert. Ray with his arm hanging out the window, a Navajo man with long gray hair, an old cowboy hat with a silver buckle on a black leather band, wearing ceremonial beads around his neck, approaching the passenger side to speak to him, asking if he can spare a buck or two. Ray wincing, knowing he's nearly cleaned out, unfolding his wallet outside the window where the man can see his one remaining dollar. Yours, Ray saying to the man, giving it to him, my last dollar. Ray smiling, the man chuckling back. Good man, you are a good man. The Navajo telling him, giving him the two-handed shake. Listen, the man saying. Ray hearing voices and drumming in the distance. There's a gathering tonight, kind of like a powwow if a friend of mine's grandson is coming of age. It's a big celebration. I was going to leave, but maybe you want to see. Ray nodding, the man smiling. Ray getting out of the truck, dismissing his ride with a wave. Following the man, listening to him tell how the boy had been fasting and praying alone on the mountain for the better part of a week. All the while, the voices and drums growing louder, the smell of food and smoke growing stronger as they approach. How soon the friend's grandson will be emerging from a sweat lodge behind the building, where all his family and loved ones have been feasting and singing and praying for him, waiting for his return, waiting to hear what the spirits have shown him, waiting to learn where his path will lead. All right, I'm glad I got through that song, y'all. That was stressing me out. That might be the secret reason I wrote the book to begin with, is just so I could sneak a song in there. So this chapter, hopefully all my clicker and thing works. This chapter is probably my favorite from the book, but really Ray is only a minor character. As the book progresses, Cindy, Martha's daughter, begins to emerge as the novel's main character. Try explaining that to an agent, by the way. The main character just kind of turns into that in the middle. So I want to change gears here and talk a little bit about the book's origins and what it was like to write it and the trials and tribulations of getting it published and the somewhat bonkers way it eventually did get published. So let's talk about that. A lot of people ask me where the book began. Is this gonna, let me remind this thing that needs to be on. If I was Thomas Wolfe, I'd have to answer this question by first explaining my mother and father's ancestral immigration stories and where they first settled in America, how they came to be in North Carolina, and maybe 50 slides later, I would be born. And you would all be asleep well before that point. But I am not Thomas Wolfe, and I think I probably only got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to skip a lot of my life. This book doesn't come to be unless I spent 2 years or so living, but mostly working in the North Carolina mountains. The Appalachian Mountains are woven into the DNA of this book. In that time, I randomly chanced upon the small town of Saluda, and this is Saluda as it was, by the way. That wasn't how it looked when I was there. Saluda is a cute town where the train tracks run parallel with the main street. I only stopped in there for coffee, but the place left an impression upon me, and Saluda became the only named North Carolina place in the book. I mostly chose to kind of keep that loose. After my stint in the mountains, I moved back to Greenville and attended grad school at ECU, where I had the good fortune of befriending Thomas Douglas. Thankfully, we read Thomas Wolfe's famous novel, Look Homeward Angel, in Mr. Douglas's 20th Century Lit course. It was a perfect time to encounter that book, having lived in the mountains those years prior. That book redefined my concept of the novel, and if you're unfamiliar with it, well, shame on you, because Thomas Wolfe is North Carolina's most famous and treasured literary son, so you have homework. Wolfe's book is thought of as a fictional autobiography, so wrap your head around that, fictional autobiography. In other words, a mostly true rundown of a man's life in early 1900s Asheville. But rather than the traditional structure of a novel that presents a unified long-form story, his novel's shape is somewhat formless and sprawls in strange places. You might be stuck 5 pages at a baseball game where his older brother changes out the cards in the scoreboard while chain-smoking cigarettes, or you could be reading 2,000 words about a really nice breakfast. And I was frustrated with the book for about 50 pages until it finally dawned on me, this book is more like life than any neatly plotted chain of events could ever hope to be. But you don't have to take my word for it. Ba-dam-bam. All right. One of the book's primary themes is grief. Wolf's fictional stand-in is named Eugene Gant, and he is the doted-upon special child of a family with many siblings. Early in the book, Eugene's baby brother dies, and this haunts him for the rest of the book, prompting the refrain, which I placed at the beginning of my book, "O lost and by the wind grieved, ghost, come back again." And in this, he is mourning the loss of a brother, but also, I think, the loss of a life that would have come from Eugene having grown up with his brother. Then, late in the book, Eugene's father gets cancer, which sends the family reeling when suddenly, out of nowhere, Ben, Eugene's closest friend and brother, dies unexpectedly. So I think this haunted book, framed with the deaths of two brothers, set its hooks in me in different ways. Not long after reading the book, I went back to the mountains, Brevard specifically, and I hiked there in the Pisgah National Forest with my friend Alicia on the Looking Glass Trail. It was a couple hours hike, and I basically talked about Look Homeward Angel all the way to the top of the mountain and then part of the way down, and that is one reason Alicia gets mentioned in the acknowledgments in the back of my book. God bless her for that. But at the top of the mountain, sitting there on the rock face, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and this is embarrassing, I'm going to tell you anyway, I shouted something foolish like, "Hey, I'm going to be the next Thomas Wolfe." All right? But I am, though, Thomas Wolfe. That is true. Again, Alicia tolerated this, and again, that's why she's in my acknowledgments. But I also have to blab about another literary influence in J.D. Salinger. I'll keep it quick. Most people know Salinger for Catcher in the Rye, but among the other books published in his life, many of them tell stories about the Glass family, another family crowded with precocious siblings. The Glass family stories dip into the lives of several different siblings, but they're all haunted by the tragic loss of their oldest brother, Seymour. Seymour is mostly absent from each of these stories, but despite this, his presence is acutely felt, and the loss of their brother haunts and shapes the lives of his siblings. I spent a long time pondering this effect, how a main character could be largely absent and become the nexus of a novel, like a kind of negative space or black hole pulling everything inward. And that's something you'll find in my book. The Twinless Twin character is largely absent for much of the book, and that would be the boy or the son that Martha references in that bit I read to you. So while he's largely absent, at the same time, he's kind of everywhere. So those are two literary influences, very highbrow stuff, and here's the next highbrow influence. Let's see if this works. This is going to run everybody out of the building. Wow, there you go. So if I wasn't nervous yet, I am now. I'm just going to leave Robert Stack there to look at us. Many years later, in the early days of my and Deniz's marriage, I was habitually watching Unsolved Mysteries reruns, as I still do today, for hours every morning during the summer. One episode aired a segment about a phenomenon called the Twinless Twin, in which a twin who has lost their twin sibling is uniquely affected in a number of ways. In cases where twins are lost in utero or shortly thereafter, some of these surviving twins grow up with no knowledge of their missing twin, yet they find themselves living their lives with a vague sense of grief or loss. Some of the survivors feel guilt. On the other end of the spectrum, some report feeling as though they have a guardian angel, and that angel is guiding and looking after them. Others feel compelled to live fast and hard lives, in a sense, living two lives in one, which the segment of that episode implies is the case with the world's most famous twinless twin, pictured here. Elvis Presley had a twin brother named Jesse Garon. This is one reason I named the Twinless Twin's brother Aaron. I thought Garon would be too on the nose. Everybody would know that, right? I can't say if there's anything to this whole Twinless Twin phenomenon since I'm not one, but I can say that it was moving to see in this television segment how these surviving twins each assembled meaning in their own way, from learning later in life that they'd had a twin they never even knew about. Like this fact of their biography helped them to make sense of something about themselves they could never quite understand, something they always felt to be true but couldn't articulate. So now let's start writing that book. So that summer in 2013, I wrote a short story, Twinless Twin, that would become the first chapter, about an enigmatic, haunted, perhaps ill-fated boy that this family desperately wishes to understand. Driving the story in the book is an unnamed tragedy that involves the child. It has devastated his mother so much so that she can't speak directly about the tragedy. She can't even speak the name of her son. He actually goes unnamed for the entirety of the book. And when I was writing the book and making all my notes and referencing and all that sort of a thing, this is how he was, the symbol I just drew for him every time I was talking about him. That was a very annoying choice to sustain for a whole novel. I also wanted to say that him having a symbol instead of a name makes him kind of like Prince. A nice journal paid me to publish that story in 2014, and that felt like really good news. That summer, I wrote several other longer short stories, all somewhat dealing with parenthood, though I wouldn't be a father for several years. And what did I do in those years? Well, not a lot. I slept late. I watched Frasier and Unsolved Mysteries. I found arrowheads. But it wasn't long before I became a father, and something about becoming a father kicked my butt into action, because that first summer I decided to quit making excuses and write a novel, whether it worked out or not. I began building a book on top of the Twinless Twin story, and which I began by reading. 2017, I planned much of the book and wrote a lot of things on note cards and blank printer paper that I shuffled around and often and kept in a clipboard. 2018, I continued with making notes and finally wrote 1.5 chapters. One of those chapters was Silver Magnolia, which was almost cut from the book, but we probably don't have time for that little side journey. In 2019, I hammered out the rest of the novel's first draft from the summer till January of the next year. And what I got in the habit of doing is every summer I would plot out everything that we had from the end of the spring semester to the beginning of the fall. And every day that I worked, I would put an X on those days. And of course, the blank days were days I did not work. And then you can see kind of the word count total as I was amassing it, 30 and 40 and 50 and 60. So that was a very productive year. In 2020, as you can see, another busy year. Less drafting this year and a lot more revision. And to brag on myself just for a second here, you'll notice there are fewer blank days. I think it's in the single digits. In 2020 and 2021, I began submitting chapters to literary magazines with the hopes that some publications would garner the interest of the literary agents I'd begun to query. Over the next few years, I had the good fortune of having 3 journals publish chapters from the book. And each of these journals published a chapter. So that was nice, but much of this happened later in the process. But back to 2021. 2021 was a challenging year, filled with querying agents and a whole lot of heartache. I don't know if you can read. Can you read the fortunes here? Failure is the mother of success. Faithless is he who quits when the road darkens. Express yourself now. All right. Tells a story. 2 agents requested to read the manuscript. One of those agents allegedly read 50 pages of the book and had this to say: the plot slows down after part 1, becoming more abstract than desired. Additionally, I am concerned by the conflation of suspense and horror with disability in this narrative. Ouch. That just about killed me. I am accustomed to literary rejection, but not on this scale. It's nothing to have a short story or a handful of poems turned down, but to have a whole novel summarily dismissed, that there is a cannonball to the chest. Also, this agent's criticism would have been easily dispelled if she'd read the the full 50 pages, and I had my doubts. In 2022, more queries, more problems. The next agent experience was rough, but useful. The agent liked the book, but didn't love certain aspects of the novel, including the ending. So that was difficult. So here's a representation of the first draft of the book. At this point, I'd already planned a follow-up novel and outlined 9 new chapters, but these are the original 9. This is what the next 9 would have looked like. There's my follow-up. This subsequent novel would tie up the whole story more neatly, but when the agent said she felt the book needed a tidier ending, I cut 3 chapters from the original 9 and cherry-picked 4 chapters from the unwritten 9, and it's all quite simple. All right. Then I spent several months writing those new chapters, which included a lengthy final chapter that leaves fewer questions at the end of the book, or at least different kinds of questions. Me, I like loose ends. That's why I like watching Unsolved Mysteries reruns so many decades later. But in the end, this was the new and almost final version. So I presented this new version of the book to the agent, and in this version, I leaned much harder into speculative or weird territory, and if I could cite another influence here, it would be Ray Bradbury in his book, The October Country, which is a collection of dark, weird stories, not unlike The Twilight Zone. Unfortunately, I later learned this wasn't to this particular agent's liking. She rejected my manuscript the day before Thanksgiving break. You lose. There's no good time for rejection, but the previous rejection from the agent, who probably didn't read 50 pages, came on a day when I got a particularly startling dental bill, but both felt like sick jokes. However, I think I received some valuable advice from this exchange, and though I have yet to mention her throughout all of this, I also received counsel from my colleague, Rebecca Harden Thrift, who has read every version of the book, which would be 3 at this point, since I revised the book yet again after that agent passed on the project. So God bless you, Rebecca, and you all wouldn't be out of line to give her a quick little round of applause. After another close call with a different agent in 2023, I resolved at this point to spend the next summer figuring out which version of the book I prefer and to leave it there. However, there were a few novel contests on my radar that had prizes that included publication of the book. I submitted to the Association of Writers and Writing Programs Novel Prize on the last day that submissions were allowed because I am cheap and did not want to fork over the $25 or $30 submission fee. And that turned out to be a good move, though it seemed like the longest of long shots at the time. And this was early 2024. It was a blind contest, anonymous submissions open to all writers at any stage of their career, and National Book Award winner Jason Mott was the judge. Mott is a fellow North Carolinian and teaches at UNCW. I later learned that some of his books have speculative elements, and I felt encouraged by this. I got the phone call on my dad's birthday that my book was a finalist, and 2 months later, on my mom's birthday, that of the 400 to 500 books submitted, mine had won. And here's the third weird date. They announced that my book had won on my birthday. How crazy is that? It's like, are we living in a simulation kind of a thing? While the book had to be kept under 110,000 words, I suggested to my editor that an omitted chapter be re-included, and she read the book with it in there and agreed that it belonged. So here's where the book rests today. And that red one, that's the re-included chapter there. One of the main advantages of the book being published by this route is that the book wouldn't have to go through any further significant revisions, which brings me back to Thomas Wolfe. Thomas Wolfe famously showed up at heavyweight publisher Scribner's in New York City with a massive manuscript in tow. His editor, Maxwell Perkins, also the editor of guys you might have heard of before, like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway, helped Woolf substantially trim down his manuscript into what became his debut novel, and the remaining half of the manuscript was later salvaged to become the subsequent follow-up of Time in the River, which was even longer and more cumbersome than its predecessor. In other words, Woolf, too, had an overly long project that nobody would tolerate until he busted that thing up. Anyway, when I was on a mountaintop in Transylvania County making silly declarations about becoming the next Thomas Wolfe, what I did not mean is that I wanted to have my 2-book project whittled down to 1 book, but here we are. All right. My novel and its journey, perhaps ironically, has pretty much thwarted my original plan for a follow-up novel, officially making the book that was published, wait for it, a Twinless Twin. And this is probably stretching the whole Twinless Twin thing a little too far, but I couldn't help myself. And since I'm up here talking, let me stretch another conceit a little bit too far. Let's back it up to Thomas Wolfe. All of this drama Thomas Wolfe faced with the publication of his first novel, having his baby cut, pasted, and changed and turned into what it became, Wolfe details it all in his slender book, The Story of a Novel. Critics thought that was a pretty self-indulgent thing to do, to write a book about how you wrote a book. I thought it was a pretty good title for a presentation. And that is it. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, we will now open up the floor for Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will get the mic to you as fast as I can.
I know that lady.
My name is Martha. I'm his mother-in-law, but I have no connection to the name of the lady in the story. But anyway, I didn't ask you the other day, but I wanted to find out about the cover. Who did the cover of the book?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, the one of the main characters in the book is named Martha, not named after my mother-in-law. Naming characters is hard. The cover artist is Edward Monk, and he's the one who famously did the screen painting.
I really loved the chapter you read. That might have been my favorite chapter too. But I also was really pleased at some of the references to North Carolina people we know and places we know. Vala Simpson, for example. Why was that important to you, to include scenes and places that your readers might also recognize?
You know, I skipped that little segment in that chapter that talks about the local legend of Acid Park, which is in chapter 3. And I think originally I put that in there because I wanted, the book isn't set anywhere near or anything like my hometown, but I wanted to at least have a little something of you know, our area in eastern North Carolina in the book. So that's why I put it in there. But why I think it's important to have different types of folklore, you know, there's local legends like that. There's just familial family lore, and then there's bigger folklore like that of the Mothman and Point Pleasant. And I love those things. It's probably the easiest answer, but also I like that it creates kind of an old feel for everything, and there might be some just some familiarity into the patterns of it, and that it feels like a very old story throughout, I hope.
What have you learned that you feel like you can share with your students now, having gone through this long process?
I think a whole lot, but with the writing of it, every chapter or every story poses its own set of problems. But I think learning to work your way through some of those problems, it teaches you things for moving forward in the next chapter and the next story. And I mean, I feel like I should say something inspiring like not giving up, But I just never really felt that that was an option, though. Before I entered the book in the contest, I did think to myself, I'm going to get this book and finish it to where, however I like it, and then who knows what will happen, and I'll put it on a shelf, and maybe the next book will be, so I was never really going to close the door on this book, but yeah, I guess just to keep trying, and it's all difficult in working through chapters and stories and books, but trying to keep the streak alive, those 2 summers where I was really hammering away, those were really important summers. And I don't think I mentioned, but I had kind of lied to myself that I could only get writing done in the summer, which I previously had off. And one thing I learned when I was really generating a lot of word count quickly is that, no, I can actually keep working on this in the fall semester. And I wrote that summer all the way through to January. So don't tell yourself lies, in other words. Just get busy.
Dean, I love the book, first off, but one of my favorites out of the book is The Amnesiacs. And I was just curious, was that story originally meant for the novel, or was it something else that wound up being incorporated into the novel?
It was my hope when writing all the chapters that each one of them could kind of stand independently. And in that way, my plan was submit these out to literary journals, hopefully get a few publications that would catch the eye of an agent I was querying. So they were all meant to stand within the novel, but some are a little more aloof or a little more abstract. And so, no, it was always a piece of the book, but it is certainly an outlier chapter that it'll kind of throw you when you get to it. You'll be thinking, what's this thing,
When or how did you gain your passion for writing?
I fancied myself the poet when I was 16. I wasn't much of a poet, and I don't know why. I guess I've always liked writing, and I appreciated some of my English teachers in high school, specifically Miss Hardy, who encouraged us to write poetry in her class as we were reading poetry. And so, I guess it's been a long time, and I took a long break. But one of my first creative writing professors at ECU kind of squashed any ideas I had about being a poet, and so I tabled that and started working with prose, and mostly short fiction prose. And I felt more confident in that. It feels like a more natural form in many ways, because we're constantly telling stories to each other about our days and our lives, and so it felt a little more natural than poetry, and then I kept going in that direction. Writing longer works as it kind of went along.
Hi.
Hey.
You showed us where you began and how you finished and the process in between. I do have a question. How long did it take you to mull over the idea before you began to write the first word?
Man, that's a good question. When people ask me how long it took to write, and that's not what you asked, but I've started telling people it took me about 5 years to write, but even that doesn't necessarily feel right. And, because the story began with a short story, which is a form I was already pretty comfortable with, writing that short story, or chapter 1, was, I thought, very easy and fun, which was surprising because it's not always fun. But that particular story, I kind of approached it with this attitude, well, of course he would have this in his background, or of course this type of thing would have happened. And then I just kind of approached the story with this, of course this would fall out from that, just working with the premise that there's someone who has done something terrible, and now his mother is trying to pick up the pieces. So I wrote that story very quickly. And then that thing, I guess, marinated all those years on the back burner. But I think when I decided to write a novel, it was just, I'm going to chase the feeling of the positive experience that was writing that story. And that same approach seemed to work well with the novel. Like, I thought, well, my characters are already in place. Now it's just I think his sister is going to go on this kind of journey, and I feel like even the family stories and all the various members of the family, their stories just started kind of spilling out too. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. Like, I think I spent a good summer though outlining, and that's why I didn't get a whole lot done that first summer. I think I said a chapter and a half. That's because I spent a good 2 months just outlining and taking notes and shutting down bad ideas and trying to come up with better ones and things like that. Yeah, so a good summer at least.
You said that after you became a parent, that is when you felt the need to, like, actually just get down to it and start writing. What was that specific feeling?
What
Like what pushed you?
What
to do
in
that?
parenthood pushed me to get busy?
Yes.
Well, there's probably a bunch of answers I would have to that, but our oldest daughter Mia was born in 2017, and I was in my mid-30s, and I ain't getting any younger, so you better get busy, kind of a thing. That's really how I felt. It's like, this book ain't gonna write itself, and why are you waiting around for some inspiration thing to drop? The easiest solution to writing a book is to look at this story that I wrote and just chase that feeling,
Dean, the book was great, and I wondered, of course, we know that Martha wasn't based on your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
And but the grandmother, who has a turn of the phrase, a wonderful storyteller. Is that somebody in your life that you picked up that, or are you the storyteller?
I fancy myself the storyteller. Are there storytellers in my family? Yeah, I don't know. I think. Well, Ray Bradbury said that all men in certain moments of intimacy are poets, and I think that we're all storytellers too, given the right circumstances and silence and being comfortable with each other enough to share. So I wouldn't put that on any one person. Maybe Dad. Dad's a good storyteller.
Anybody else?
So it took a while to write this story. Seems like it probably took a lot of energy out of you. What did you use? How were you able to kind of sustain your energy and your creativity as you're going through this process? Because it seems like it takes a while.
I think what took the most energy is the querying process and just sending out. I don't want to tell you how many letters I sent to agents, and emails. But I think writing the book was easier than trying to find a publisher for it, that's for sure. And like Kay, when you were asking about advice to give students, I got no advice on querying. I was completely unsuccessful. I was not completely unsuccessful with that, but thankfully the award cut through all that for me. But I think, Mia was taking very regular naps, and I had many windows for writing that summer when I was generating a lot of word count. And so the summer was a great time to get most of the book written. But I think what really required a lot of energy was just the constant night after night of querying agents and trying to figure out how to play that game, which I'm still trying to learn.
So this story is more outside of you than inside of you now.
Yeah.
How does it feel to create something that will exist outside of you and beyond you as an author?
You know, someone asked me about the reach of the novel and how many people would get to read it now, and I just have no idea what to expect. And I hope it has a long life. And I think my biggest hope for the book is that it's kind of a slow burn, and people tell each other about it, and it picks up steam in that way. And you know, it feels nice. And there are little things in the book that bring me little pleasures, like, you know, like the little bit of Acid Park in there, or an allusion to a short story by a West Virginian writer I really like, or things like that. There are little details in there that I think most people will never know except me, and I just really like that. I like that I've sneaked in my love of so many things and something that hopefully will continually be, you know, read. That would be nice.
Well, we are going to conclude our evening tonight by giving Dean a round of applause for sharing his story. And being so open with all of us. It is hard to open the door to all the things that you do in the quiet and alone in your office or at home, and then to make them public. And you all have been a wonderful audience tonight. I hope that you all get a chance to read the book. It is available outside, and Dean can sign them for you. I finished it on Saturday and absolutely loved it. He's a wonderful observer of life, and I think you could hear that. He's a truth teller. There's wisdom in this book. And I hope that you get a chance to talk with him about it. We have a reception for you out here so that you can linger and meet and visit. And hopefully you won't leave hungry. So please join us. Thank you.